The ACC is imploding. And by imploding, I mean super, super duper imploding. So they get together at some point a couple of years ago, and they're like, I got this idea. Nothing's going to change in college football. It's always going to be the same old Big Ten. It's always going to be the same old Pac-12. It's always going to be the same old SEC. So here's what we need to do. Here's my idea for you. Let's sign a contract for 30 years. 30 years.
20 to be fair, but yes.
20 to be fair, but it feels like 30. It feels like 50. And let's make the buyout so immense that you can never, ever get out. So really, it's a bad deal on both sides because the teams can't get out. And now the ACC is essentially going to implode because they're colluding together to make it implode. So who's left? It's like if you and I took over the police department, who's left to give us a speeding ticket? Nobody.
Okay, so
tell me what's happening. By the way, for those that don't like speeding tickets, use the Waze app. You heard it here first. That's just a free recommendation. This portion of the program brought to you by Bassey Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive. Bassey Lawn and Garden, industrial and commercial mowers. Buying power saves you money, whether you're in Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, Cleveland, Tennessee. Bassey Lawn and Garden, man alive, it's worth the drive. So give me the latest on the ACC deal and give everybody the latest because this thing's going to implode. And if I'm Greg Sankey, I'm sitting back and I'm ready to pick a team. There are reasons it's happening now too. And it's not just because it's a downtime in the schedule. It's because you're going to have all these guys meeting at spring meetings, and you're going to have all these guys meeting at SEC media days where the coaches and stuff. And I'm just telling you, don't be surprised if the SEC expands like before this year. It won't go into effect for a couple years, but don't be surprised. Tell me what's happening. Tell everybody what's happening.
Well, buckle up for this arms race, guys, because this is the first time. So for a couple bit of history points. First, the SEC versus the Big Ten. Dave, as you know, the SEC and the Big Ten, because they're so geographically different, they've never really fought over teams. The only team that you could say could have been in either conference was Missouri, right? But no one was fighting over Missouri. And
it was the dumbest pickup that makes no sense in the history. That's the one time where I felt like the SEC dove into let's get a television market, which has been the Big Ten business model.
Right, exactly. And that's why the Big Ten added Maryland and Rutgers. So we'll come back to the SEC versus the Big Ten. But for those who didn't pay attention to the show last week, the point of the ACC issue is you talked about it. They signed this horrible deal. Florida State and Clemson are making every school in the ACC is getting $17 million in TV revenue, whereas the SEC schools are getting $55 and $60 million. No way Florida State can compete with Florida. No way Clemson can compete with South Carolina. So Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Miami were the original four schools that have said, we want to get a higher piece of the revenue sharing. The ACC is like, tough break. And then they're like, well, we'll leave. And the ACC says, well, you can't leave. We got this giant exit fee and we got grant of rights through 2036. So we could blackball you from being on TV if you go anywhere else. I predicted last week, because we found out the ACC has two more teams on board. I predicted that the plan was to make sure that when they leave, the ACC implodes, because if the ACC doesn't exist, there's no grant of rights. I was wrong. They have a new plan in place. Just get a majority of people on board. They can vote to it. If you get a majority of the athletic directors on board to vote to end the grant of rights deal, then theoretically it doesn't even matter.
Right.
Well, they already got 7 schools. We found, and you only need 8 for majority. We found out who the 7 were. The 4 that I just talked about, Brett McMurphy of Action Network reported yesterday. The other 3 schools on board, Virginia Tech, not shocking. They're a pretty big revenue generator. Virginia, also a decent revenue generator, which shocked me. I didn't realize they actually are a pretty good money driver. And NC State. Guys, they need 1 more school, and they can vote to end the grant of rights deal and end the exit fee, and the ACC's over. Here's what happens at that point. The Big Ten and the SEC, for the first time, are going to be locked in a bloodthirsty battle for schools. So what's going to happen is I'm going to tell you the first part. I'm going to tell you how each conference tries to add teams. The Big Ten, Dave, as you know, has the AAU requirement. You got to be an AAU member school academically to be able to join the Big Ten. That's their requirement right now. The only exception they would make for that is Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is basically AAU quality. Because they don't have a medical school, they can't be invited into AAU.
Hey, I got to take a quick time out. I don't know what that means. What does AAU mean?
So AAU is, let me see what it stands for. AAU.
I thought that was the basketball circuit.
Association of American Universities, which is this collection of elite universities that you have to invite schools in. These are what you call public Ivies.
Okay.
So
okay. Is UMass in there for personal reasons? Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Boston U is in there, but not UMass. But yeah, so the Big Ten, with the exception of Notre Dame, right now is still only accepting AAU member schools if you want to join. They have, because the Big Ten, it's unlike the SEC, it's about research along with athletics. So AAU, they have to hit that baseline. Then for the Big Ten, number 1 to them is markets and number 2 is brand. For the SEC, it's the reverse. Number 1 is brand, number 2 is markets. Academics don't even matter. They're just taking the revenue. But
and regionality. Except for Missouri, which I guess is kind of a southern state.
So the first easy split is going to happen. Virginia Tech. Virginia is an AAU school. Virginia Tech's not. Virginia Tech's the bigger brand. Both are equal in markets. It's an easy split, right? SEC's getting Virginia Tech. Big Ten's getting Virginia.
Okay.
Obvious. Okay, here's where the fight comes. We know the Big Ten wants Miami. We also know the SEC wants North Carolina. And we know the minute the Big Ten adds North Virginia, they're going to want to get into North Carolina. So here comes the SEC's issue. I would theoretically think they would add Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia Tech. They might need to start adding schools like Miami to make sure that the number one thing the SEC doesn't want is the Big Ten getting into their markets. Even if they don't care for the schools themselves, the SEC does not want the Big Ten in the Florida markets. They want to corner the North Carolina markets. So this is where the arms race comes. Is the SEC just going to take all these schools, or are they going to take the schools they want? Because the SEC might be trying to keep the Big Ten out. And here's the other question. Even if they're trying to take all the schools, will the SEC outbid the Big Ten for North Carolina? North Carolina is an AAU school, so they got the academics. And the Big Ten has a TV deal worth twice as much. They have more to offer North Carolina right now. And so,
okay, here's what I want to do. So I want to go through the ACC schools that are making the push. So we've got the 7 and a new game show that's sweeping the nation. It's called Doc or Not. So if Doc Holliday says that it's okay, then the SEC should take them. You're looking at me like I'm insane, Caleb. So if Doc Holliday says it's okay from Tombstone, and he was actually a real person, but from the movie Tombstone, if he says it's okay, then I think that they should take them, and then we'll get your thoughts. So there are no restrictions. We're going to say whether it's a good fit or not. So I don't want to get into the conversation of, well, that would be 28 teams, Dave. Well, yeah, Dave's a dreamer. Dave believes. And so it's Doc or Not. So here we go. So you give me the ACC school, and I'm going to Doc or Not it. So let's go through the 7, and I'm going to tell you whether or not I would take them into the SEC if I'm Commissioner Dave Sankey.
All right, I'm going to go north to south. You mean Greg Sankey, by the way, not Dave Sankey.
No, I was referring to me.
Oh, okay. You think it's okay.
Or Greg Hooker. Either one.
All right, Virginia.
Why don't you shut the hell up?
I don't want Virginia.
I'm with
nothing
you.
For me.
I'm with you largely because of the next school, Virginia Tech.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Love Virginia Tech. I think that would be a great SEC fit.
That's a natural rival, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, isn't it? It's like, okay, so
even without the bastardized game they had
right.
Bristol Motor Speedway, where you couldn't see the game because it was 5 miles away. Go ahead.
North Carolina.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Taking it.
All right, here's my question. Hypothetically, North Carolina joins the Big Ten. NC State.
Why don't you shut the hell up? You suck.
I'm not taking NC State.
You're completely wrong on this, Dave. If North Carolina you go all out for North Carolina. But if they choose to join the Big Ten, you got to take NC State. You cannot let the Big Ten in the North Carolina market while you're not in there.
But I'm strictly ball, man. I mean, they got enough money.
NC State is going to be a revenue generator. I know you're strictly ball, but it's about revenue. And NC State still, they probably care more about football than North Carolina, I would say. And
Yeah. I mean, it's a basketball state. Okay, go ahead. Let's get through these.
All right. So, all right, I've named 4 schools now. Clemson.
I'm your Huckleberry.
No question.
And by the way, I'm telling you right now, Clemson's going to the SEC because they won't join the Big Ten. They can't. And so
why not?
They're not an AAU school.
Oh, okay. You get back to that. All right. Go ahead.
All right. Another non-AAU school that I can guarantee you is joining the SEC. So I know where you're going to go. Florida State.
I'm your Huckleberry.
I would take Florida State in a heartbeat.
I would too. So right now we're at Florida State, Clemson, one of the North Carolina schools, in Virginia Tech, right?
Yeah.
All right. And
I'm losing track of how many teams the
wait,
SEC
and then the last one, the U.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Hey, man. We're going to start traveling either this year or next. And Coral Gables is gorgeous.
I would love an excuse to go to Miami every other year. I'm not going to lie. I will say this. I actually wouldn't take Miami from the SEC's perspective, but I would take them now because I think you agree, right, Dave? You don't want the Big Ten in Florida. You don't want them in Florida at all. And
Florida doesn't want that, and Florida State doesn't want that because you would be able to recruit out of Miami. So that's pretty.
Now
scary.
here's my last prediction. This is not a revenue generator. They're one of the welfare queens of the ACC, meaning they just take the money and they don't produce anything of value. But even though they're that, I think this will be the 8th school, and this is where the SEC is in danger. This is where the SEC is in real danger. If the Big Ten gets Virginia, North Carolina, and Miami, Georgia Tech, because the Big Ten would love the Atlanta market.
Okay, that's a hard one for me because of the history of it, but I don't know if they could ever be prominent. I think they would get beat in almost like Vanderbilt, and I think it would just help other schools. Well, I think it would help other schools recruit in Atlanta, would probably help Tennessee. So actually, Doc, what do you think?
I'm your Huckleberry.
I will give that a thumbs up.
I'm on your side, but for this reason. You definitely don't want the Big Ten in Miami, but you sure as hell don't want them in Atlanta. That is SEC Mecca. You cannot afford to have the Big Ten in Atlanta.